Hello and welcome to Stories in Harmony. I'm your host, Laura Ferrero, a journalist, marketing strategist, and brand storyteller who helps artists and entrepreneurs share their most powerful brand stories. Today, I'm joined by someone who almost needs no introduction. It's John Oates, one half of Hall & Oates, which is arguably the most successful duo in rock history. In addition to selling millions of albums, they became huge MTV video stars in the 1980s. In fact, Michael Jackson told John that the bass line for Hall & Oates' hit song I Can't Go For That inspired his song Billie Jean. Hall & Oates was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2014. A pinnacle of their career came when they performed at Live Aid, one of the largest televised concert events in history. In addition to performing their own songs, they were personally asked by Mick Jagger to be his backing band when he performed on stage at Live Aid with Tina Turner. But the truth of the matter is that John's life wasn't all glitz and glamour. Known for his ubiquitous mustache, which made him immediately recognizable, he actually shaved it off several years ago during a time of personal transformation when he was trying to figure out who he was outside of the spotlight. We talk about this today, along with many other things that were really interesting that came up in his book, Change of Seasons, the memoir that he wrote that is really fascinating and quite revealing. John has carved out a beautiful life for himself, splitting his time with his family between Nashville and Colorado. He's also put his considerable creative energies into his solo music career. He supports several important causes and pursues fascinating hobbies, which you'll hear a little bit about during our chat. So please sit back and enjoy my conversation with John Oates. John, it is such a pleasure to connect with you. I'm so excited to be talking to you. I actually finished reading your memoir recently.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, which was just so beautifully written and such amazing stories that you shared that even as a longtime fan, I wasn't aware of.
Yeah, like a lot of people say that about me.
And also I learned that we're both, New York Italians. So
yes, my mother's side was all Italian. Yep.
Mine too. Yes. Yeah.
Right.
So, but I'd love to chat with you about a bunch of different things, but I was hoping to start. So you've obviously had tremendous success throughout your career and as part of Hall & Oates, one of the most successful duos in rock history, but you've also faced your share of obstacles throughout your life and career. And can you share a little bit about one of the turning point moments in your life that kind of changed the trajectory of where you were headed?
Wow. Okay. Well, that's a pretty big question, Laura. And since you've read the book, as I can't lie to you. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think as I look back on my life, there was a number of very important decisions that were made, in the early days as a child, made by my parents. And one of them was my father's company was moving to Pennsylvania from New York City. And this was in the early 50s. And, if the employees went along, they would get a raise or, they would get a promotion of sorts. So my dad moved us to Pennsylvania, and that was a bold thing to do because, with immigrant parents, with their entire life based around New York City, all their brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and everything, all based in New York, we were the only family that actually moved away. So it was a major move. So had I not gone to Pennsylvania, my life would have been completely different. Who knows what would have happened. But of course, that led me to growing up in Pennsylvania, ending up at Temple University, And the reason I chose Temple University, and this was another important decision, because there were 3 or 4 different colleges that I was considering, and they were all outside of Pennsylvania. Some of them were state schools, and some of them were like further away. But I wanted to be in Philadelphia because I wanted to be close to where whatever the local music scene was, because I grew up in a small town. There was nothing there. And of course, that led to me meeting Daryl Hall, which of course is a major point in changing, in my life changing. So there's another big one. So as time went on, and I don't want to get bogged down in the business decisions that were made or not made. But one of the biggest things that happened, and you probably read about this in the book, was near the end of the 80s, around 80, 87 or 88, actually. I had a kind of a revelation about the things that I had not paid enough attention to business-wise, and so I had a kind of a come to Jesus moment when I realized that the inattention that I had to the business side of my life really left me in a weird position. So I was getting divorced. The Hall & Oates' manager at the time left for greener pastures. And I was really in a very weird place in my life, and both professionally and personally. And that's when I made the decision that I would start my life over again. And this was probably the most important thing that I ever did. And I basically sold everything I had, and I had considerable things. So even though I was, I had been basically, the money had gone away, I had amassed a very rich rock star type life. I had 2 apartments in New York. I had a house in Connecticut. I had an airplane. I had a collection of antique cars. Blah 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 blah. And basically, what happened was I realized I didn't need any of it, and I sold everything. And so that kind of put me back on my feet financially. And what I did was, the only thing I didn't sell was this little condo in Aspen, Colorado that I had, and I moved into it. And that changed my life because I started over again completely. I reinvented myself. And that led to meeting my future wife, building a house, having a kid, thinking about myself and my music in a completely different way. I had been on the road for over 20 years straight without ever stopping. And it was really, it was really just a change. I realized I could be someone else. I could really start over again. And so that really changed everything for me. So when I came back to music after that, I came back as a different person with a different set of priorities. So, I mean, and then it goes on, and I'm making decisions every day that I think are really important. Just recently, I've embarked on an entire new solo career playing acoustically around the world, which is really interesting and something I've never done before, which I've always wanted to do. So even in the most recent context, I'm still making important decisions that are kind of channeling my life in one direction or the other.
Yeah, and it seems that when, just going back to what you were talking about with some of the business decisions you, excuse me, you weren't paying attention to. And, in the 80s, you and Daryl had achieved some of the greatest successes I think musicians could hope for on paper. But it also seems that you found that some of it was actually quite hollow, that there was more of a meaning to life that you were seeking. Is that accurate?
It's absolutely accurate. The 80s, a lot of people always say, they assume that because we were so popular and having such commercial success in the 80s, that might have been like the pinnacle of my life, my favorite time. And far be it from the truth, because honestly, it was not that much fun, because it was crazy and it was a completely, I had no time. I think what people don't realize about success is that one of the biggest negatives or pitfalls of success is that your time is not your own. You begin to lose control of your ability. The more successful you are, the less you have control of how you do things and basically how the path of your life. So the 70s were really much more exciting and fun for me because everything was new. It was an entire decade of discovery, of musical discovery, personal discovery, physical, going to different cities and towns and countries for the first time. So everything was new. So that the 70s for me was really an exciting time. The 80s were really just like kind of a whirlwind and a blur. And so then, and at the end of the 80s is when I made that decision to start over again and move to Colorado. And so that really was the turning point.
Yeah, and I read you shared in your book that you did some visualization exercises before you actually made that change, and
Yes, I
you
did.
saw yourself in I think it was in a cabin in the
That's right.
woods, and
Yeah. Yeah.
then do you think that not to get too woo woo, but that those visualizations help manifest that into your life?
You know, prior to that, I never would have believed it. It sounded like, as you said, woo woo or hokey pokey or, hippy dippy, whatever you want to call it. No, what happened was and I don't mind sharing this. When I was having problems, I was married in the 80s, which, to a wonderful girl, and had nothing to do with her, but our lives had gone in different directions. And she wanted something that I wasn't ready for at the time. And we went to basically a shrink, a marriage counselor of sorts. And it didn't really help. We ended up getting divorced, which I kind of knew was going to happen regardless. But interestingly enough, after we were divorced, I went back to that same guy, to the same shrink. And he said, I had a feeling you might come back. He said, because I think there was a lot of unresolved things. So part of the work I began to do with him, and I had always poo-pooed the shrink, self-help, shrink thing. I always thought, I can do this myself. I'm strong-willed, and I can handle this. But I went back, and as I began to work with him, he told me some things. He said, I've seen a lot of people like you. They had money, they had this, they had success, and they never really addressed the fundamental things that needed to be addressed. And so we embarked on this visualization exercise. And one of the things I began to visualize was, as you said, it was a cabin in the woods. There was a dog, and I visualized this road that led toward the cabin and then away from the cabin. And as what I did was I visualized all the people in my life that I felt were toxic or not looking in my best interest. And I envisioned them coming toward me in the road and then going by and disappearing. And that's exactly what happened. I got rid of everybody.
Oh,
All these people were gone from my life. And then, interestingly enough, my wife and I in Colorado, after we met and we decided to work, to get married, we built a log cabin. And it was funny at the time. I wasn't even thinking about the visualization, but I manifested that reality somehow or another. Even the dog, we got the dog too, So
oh wow.
yeah, so it really worked. And it's funny. My son is 28 and he's going through some issues, and I'm talking to him about the exact same thing, about visualizing where he wants to be in his life and how he can make his kind of his dream a reality. So I think there's a lot to it. I think there's a lot of validity to that.
Yeah, I've been doing that too, and when I can kind of get quiet and sort of tap in more to my heart rather than my head, because I tend to live a lot in my head, that seems to be when there's some real something really powerful behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's so
yeah.
fascinating. And as you mentioned, when you were talking about some of the possessions that you shed, you've had some really incredible hobbies in your life, from flying and race car driving to
Yeah.
skiing, and you're also an explorer, like beyond even touring. Touring on your own and with Hall and Oates, you seem to, whenever you had some time off, you've explored the world. How have some of those things that you love, those passions, shaped your artistry?
Well, I think as a songwriter, everything you do, every place you go, the people you meet, the experiences that you have, they're all grist for the mill. I think that to me, what separates songwriters from a lot of other people is that they are perhaps a little bit more attuned to what's going on, physically, spiritually, emotionally, around them, and then they express themselves through song, through the writing of the song. That's kind of that's the way they speak. I found that to be a pretty common commonality among songwriters that I've met. And so, maybe it's just of a sensitivity to the environment, to the people you're around, and here again, and then somehow expressing it in song. It doesn't always have to be literal. It's not always, oh, well, I met so-and-so on a mountaintop and this is what happened to us, but it's really, I mean, some people do, they write literally, they translate their life literally into song. And some people use it, can use these very profound moments or experiences as more of a metaphor.
Yeah, I love that you shared in the book about She's Gone, being inspired by getting stood up by a date on New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
It's so funny because I had always imagined that listening to the song is the end of a long-term relationship. And
See, that just goes to show you.
yeah.
It's not always what you might think. In fact, one of the, I'm doing this series of acoustic performances now, and I call it an evening of songs and stories. And what I do is I do tell the backstories of some of these songs. And I think people are fascinated with not only learning about how the process might work, but they're also, I think, fascinated and kind of, like really surprised about how seemingly mundane situations can spark something much more profound. As you said, just getting stood up on a date, and all of a sudden you have a song that has lived on for over 50 years and still affects people today. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And sort of having these events that do seem mundane and then creating a story around it that, like you said, might not be literal and can make it just timeless and eternal is quite amazing.
Yeah. Well, every once in a while you get lucky.
I think it's a little more than luck in your case, especially. But yes. And so it seems also that I believe you live part time in Nashville and part time in Aspen.
Yes.
But living in Nashville, which of course is known as Music City, it seems like it may have opened up a whole new world of musical opportunities and collaborations. How are you finding yourself newly inspired?
Well, I've been here for almost 15 years, believe it or not.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I didn't
Yeah, well,
realize that.
started coming to Nashville in the late 90s when Daryl and I were really not doing much at all. I was looking for more creativity, and I found it in Nashville. And I began in the early 2000s. I came back and a little more seriously began to get involved with the music community, and especially with the beginnings of the Americana music community, which was really forming in the early 2000s. I was involved with the Americana Music Association from its inception, basically. And as I did, what happened was I really began to be part of this Americana and roots music community. And what it did was it reignited my earliest musical DNA, which was roots music, blues, folk, and things like that, way before I met Daryl Hall. And I had kind of push that to the side. It had been always kind of simmering in me, but the Hall and Oates experience was so all-consuming that there was no room for that. So once the Hall and Oates experience kind of began to wane a little bit, I began to find a music community that really had the same influences and the same aesthetic as me. It opened up an opportunity for me to reach back into my past, rediscover some of that music, and then reimagine it and in a way that could take me forward. And so, and I began to make albums. I've made 8 solo albums now, and it's been a journey of rediscovery of the original influences, but then taking them and filtering them through the lens of who I am today with the amount of experience I've had, and not experience, technically in the studio, but also personal experience. So it really, this move to Nashville was very, very important. That really gave me a pathway to the future of who I could be on my own.
Yeah, I obviously in your album Arkansas, I believe it's 2018, that the influence of roots music and Americana is so evident and exciting. It's just so, I don't know, so beautifully done.
Thank you. I'm
And
really proud of. I'm really proud of that record. And here again, that record did not. I didn't even know I was making that album. Honestly, I had no intentions of making that album. I had gone into the studio to do. I thought maybe I would do an EP of Mississippi John Hurt songs, who's one of my childhood heroes. I just wanted to do something. I love being in the studio, and I thought, well, I'll just go and record because I know all his music. It's part of, very much a part of me, and I thought this would be great. And so I went in the studio and recorded a couple tracks with just me and a guitar, very exactly in the way that he would have done it. And then I sat back and listened to it, and I said, why am I doing this? It's like, it's already been done before, and I'm never going to do it as well as him. And what's the point? What am I trying to prove here? And then I thought to myself, now one night, I don't know how it happened, but I thought to myself, I still like these songs. I just don't like the way I'm doing them. And I said, I wonder what it would sound like if I put a band together and played the exact same songs, which have always been done solo acoustic, right? Acoustic guitar and voice. But what if I put them in front of a band and we just reimagined them somehow or another? And I had no idea. It was just a wild, crazy idea. And I said, so I assembled this incredible band of, Sam Bush on mandolin and a cello, a pedal steel, a percussion, a bass, electric guitar, things that you wouldn't normally associate with this type of music, instrumentation wise. And the first thing we did was cut a Mississippi John Hurt song, and it was a Stacko Lee. And what I did was I played exactly what Mississippi John Hurt would have played, but by surrounding it with these incredible musicians and these incredible tonalities of unusual instruments, mandolin, pedal steel, cello, it took on an entirely different thing. And so we recorded it, one song, and then I went into the control room, and I sat with my engineer and co-producer, David Kalmusky, and I said, and he looked at me, he said, John, he goes, I don't know what this is, but it's really cool, and you should just keep doing it. And I went, okay. and that's how the album began, because honestly, I didn't even know I was going to do it. And then as time went on, I realized that it was such a great sound and it was such a great idea that it shouldn't be limited to just Mississippi John Hurt. So what I did was I started listening to what was on the radio in the 1920s and the 1930s at the beginning of American popular music. And I was kind of blown away by the music that was even on the jukeboxes in Mississippi. Cowboy music by Gene Autry, Jimmy Rogers, the yodeling brakeman, one of the godfathers of country music. And these were the songs that Mississippi John Hurt was listening to. So I said, okay, well, there was ragtime. And I said, okay, well, let me do this snapshot of what was happening in American roots music during that particular unique period of time. And so that's why I couldn't believe that, I did further research into Mississippi John Hurt, realized that he was a huge fan of Jimmy Rogers, which I never would have put together, so I did a Jimmy Rogers song, and then I did a ragtime song, and, and so on and so forth. And so the album began to be this kind of snapshot of this unique period in the late 20s, early 30s, when radio and records were just really beginning.
That is amazing that you went back to the source and that you found new inspiration in that. Right. And it's just incredible. And, you mentioned all the players that you were working with. I think that that's a common thread throughout your career is you've always been surrounded by and worked with some exceptional players.
Daryl and I have been very fortunate in our Hall & Oates band. We've always had unbelievable musicians, because what I learned a long time ago is that music players who are not necessarily songwriters love to play good songs. When players are left to their own devices, if they don't have a song to play, they just noodle around and jam around, and it's usually this kind of indefined, kind of musical thing. But as soon as there's a song that gives them a point of view and a place to kind of focus on, it brings out their talents, and they're able to enhance the song. So being a songwriter has enabled me to, here again, play with great players.
Yeah, I don't know, that's incredible. I've interviewed everyone from Jim Keltner, the drummer who's performed on most of the Beatles solo albums, to Roger Joseph Manning Jr., who's Beck's primary keyboardist, but has also collaborated with Ringo Starr and Morrissey. And, they are such amazing players that they bring so much to the songs that these incredible artists have written, and you can't imagine them without their contributions.
That's right. Very important. Yeah.
So important. And so I also wanted to ask you about your song Disconnected, a recent single, which I love. And it seems like a perfect message for this time I wouldn't exactly call it post-pandemic. We still a lot of things we're experiencing as a result of that, but one of them, I think, is disconnection. But I think you wrote that before.
I wrote that during the pandemic.
During. Oh, okay. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I actually had the idea for that a long, long time ago, probably 10 years ago. I had the title and I had an idea, but I didn't know what the song was about. All I had was, I just thought, oh, that's a good title, and maybe someday it'll be a good song, And it was just in the archives, in the digital archives on the computer, sitting there. And then when the pandemic hit, I realized that its time had come, because we were disconnected. It was a disconnection that we were all feeling physically, mentally, emotionally, And I thought, okay, this title has been waiting for the right moment. And then it was the right moment. And then the song just flowed. I mean, it was so easy to write. It came directly from sitting at home during the pandemic.
Yeah. Oh, it just seems so timely. And speaking of connection, one of the ways I think we really can powerfully connect with one another is by sharing stories. And that's what I've done, throughout my career as a journalist, and also helping musicians and artists share their stories. And one thing I've learned that surprised me is a lot of artists don't believe their stories are worth telling beyond their music. Some people struggle with that. And what prompted you to write your memoir, Change of Seasons, and share those stories with us?
Well, I was a journalism major as well. Writing has always come easy to me. I always thought that one day I might write something. I didn't know it would be a biography or an autobiography. But what happened was I was doing a series of interviews with a guy who grew up in Pennsylvania near where I grew up. And he was an author himself. He wrote a lot of history books. And every time I would do an interview, and he was a big fan, and I did a lot of interviews with him. And every time I do an interview with him, he just seemed to get me in a way. I just felt very comfortable with him. And at one point, he said, you've told me so many stories. He said, you should write a book. And I said, well, I've always thought about it. He goes, well, I'd love to help you. And that was the thing that kickstarted it. And he said, let me guide you through the process, and I'll help you, and I'll be your co-writer, your editor, whatever it is you need, and we'll see if we can get this going. And in the beginning, he was very hands-on, and I gave him a bunch of journals, copies of journals that I had done during the 70s. And he what he ended up doing, he became like this, he became like a coach almost for me. He kind of teed me up. He said, well, in 1972, you said you were here and you did this, and he did all this research. And after a while, I began to joke with him. I said, if you ever decide to stop writing, you should work for the FBI, because you're really good. You can find out everything. But and that's how it happened. That's how it started. So I began to write, and it's interesting, having written long form like that. I didn't have a voice. I had words and I had experiences, but I needed to find a voice. And so I did a lot of reading during that period of time too,
Mm.
on some authors that I really have a lot of respect for. And I started to see how they, especially historic novels and historic and in history books. And I began to see how they could bring a scene or an instance alive through their descriptive writing. And so in the beginning, it was very bland and matter of fact, journalistic in a way, I guess you'd say. And then as time went on, I went back and rewrote almost everything in the beginning, because I realized then I found my voice about halfway through the process. And I started to really bring these scenes alive in a way. And I realized, okay, well, now I think I've got something. So I went back and basically rewrote the whole first half of the book, and then carried on from there. So it was an experience, it was a journey to learn how to do this.
Yeah, and how do you think you realized that you'd suddenly found your voice? Was it a moment where it just kind of flowed, or what was
Well,
that
my
like?
friend Chris, who worked with me, he said, "This is great. This is great. Now you're onto something," and
Ah,
and also it was when I was looking at what I had written, it was more exciting. It was more descriptive, evocative. It was more poetic, and I just said, "Okay, I figured it out. Now I got to go. Unfortunately, I have to go back and do it again."
yeah, I know that's a lot of work, but
Well, writing is rewriting, right?
exactly. Yeah, I've definitely learned that multiple times throughout my career. And, if you were to talk to someone who felt a little bit unsure whether their story is worth telling, because someone might think, oh, John Oates, he's one of the most successful musicians ever, and of course he should share his story. But what value do you see in maybe musicians that are just starting out or haven't achieved such success, sharing their stories about the music but beyond the music?
Well, everyone has something to share. It's really, I think, age, maturity, experience brings a little depth, a lot more depth to the story. I mean, I couldn't have written this book early in my career because I wouldn't have had a story to tell. My story was still in the process of becoming. So, I think there's a lot of value in in being able to reflect and look back on a set of experiences and then see them, from a different perspective. But that's not to say, a young musician who has something to say, there's no reason they can't say it and share it, whether it's in a song or in a, in a memoir or a movie or documentary or whatever it is they might want to do.
Yeah, and what I definitely agree. And even in just like short bursts on social media now, where you can communicate directly with your fans,
Yeah.
it's so neat to find out more about, artists that you admire than just the music. I know a lot of times, we want the music, artists want the music to speak for itself, and oftentimes it does, but I think there's a curiosity there to go
Well, social
beyond.
media has enabled people to actually engage. There was always that kind of fourth wall concept, that the artist was here and the audience was here, and the only time they kind of came together was in a live setting. Other than that, but now that is definitely changed. Now, fans, the audience, who they can really feel like they can engage with an artist more directly, for better or worse.
Right. I know it can sometimes feel like another another thing on your to-do list, but you're very good at social media and Instagram,
Well, I've got a good person who helps me. Trust me.
Oh.
Yeah, I've definitely
Uh-huh.
got a whole team. So yeah, I mean,
Oh.
left to my own devices, I probably wouldn't post anything.
Well, they do a good job, and it feels authentic,
It is authentic. Well, I'm doing it, but a lot of times, I got to get kicked in the ass, so hey, something, and like the other day we were out in the garden, and I don't know, did you see the post with the bird's nest? Uh,
Yes, for Mother's Day.
yeah, well, that's my wife is a gardener, so she's out in the garden. I went out to see what she was up to, and we started talking, and she said, "Oh, take a look at these baby birds." And we saw the baby birds, and she said, "Get up there and take a video." So it was her idea. So I said, "Okay." So I just went up and did it.
Oh, that was that was great. And I guess, shifting gears a little bit, you mentioned your wife, Amy, and I know that you've been involved in supporting some great causes. I think you partnered with Amy to support Feeding America.
Yep.
Um, and then you've also done some work with Movember
Yeah.
to shine a light on men's mental health issues and growing back your iconic mustache, which there it is.
I still got this too. That's okay. Just trying to have a new look.
Yeah, yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your work with those organizations?
Well, I've always felt like trying to give back as best I can. Over the years, I've done it with Daryl in various situations. Um, but we during the pandemic, I was watching way too much television, and when I started seeing these things about families with American families who couldn't put food on the table, and then I'd go to the supermarket and the shelves are full of food, and I'm thinking, well, okay, there's a problem here, and I actually got angry about it, and I said, in a country as wealthy and as America, there should be no one who goes without food. There's no reason for that. And so we started researching, and we found Feeding America, and we realized that Feeding America was a really great organization where 98%, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's very high. Now, a lot, the large majority of the money that they generate goes directly to the food banks. And a lot of charitable organizations, they eat up a lot of their resources in administrative costs and things like that. So I was so impressed with the fact that it was such a efficient organization. And we reached out to them, and I knew a lot of musicians weren't touring, and I thought, well, I bet you they're just sitting at home. And I know a lot of people that I can call, and I started literally calling friends. Said, "Hey, will you do a video clip on your sofa, or do a real video or anything?" And we were going to do an online fundraiser, and all these great people jumped on board. Dave Grohl and I even got Daryl to do it. Don't ask me how that happened. Sean Colvin and Jim James from My Morning Jacket, and and the list goes on and on and on. So all these, and then once, as these things go, once a certain amount of well-known people commit to something, then everyone else wants to do it. It's just one of those things.
Yeah.
I got Sarah Bareilles, and all these great people who were really, really great, good-hearted people, and they're all sitting around at home, and so it really wasn't much for them to just do a video and submit it. So that worked out really well, and we generated 350,000 meals.
Oh, wow.
So that was really great.
That's amazing. Oh, that's so important. And also your work with Movember. Could you talk a little bit about how they shine a light on men's mental health issues and what you did with them?
Well, men tend not to want to be quite so open about that sort of thing, whether it's mental health, even physical health for that matter. Women, I think, are much more open about it. And I've watched the women's health movement, especially with breast cancer and things like that. And I used to joke about it. I said, well, if women can get an NFL, 300-pound defensive lineman to wear pink shoes, then then I think there's, the men's health movement is not quite up to speed. So I thought to myself, maybe there's a way, if I got involved, maybe I could, shine a light on this and maybe make it a little bit more, widespread. And I think it's changing. In fact, I don't know it's changing. Men are much more open about things like this now. So anyway, when Movember was available, we reached out to them, and then they reached out to me, and I kind of joked. I said, "What took you so long?" I got involved, and I went to England, where it's based out of London, the main offices, and we did a bunch of really cool TikTok and stuff like that, and had a lot of fun with it. And I did a bunch of shows, and we promoted the movement, and hopefully we maybe got some people to think about it in a different way.
Yeah, that's wonderful. It's such an important thing, I think, as an artist, if you can use your platform for good. Um, and John, just on a personal note, I'm sure you've heard this before, but I want to thank you, because if I'm ever feeling low, speaking of mental health, if I'm having a down day, one of the most fail-safe methods I have for coming out of that is turning on Hall and Oates and just dancing around my room.
Good. Okay, whatever works for you. I think
Yeah,
that's
it
great.
works. It definitely works. And I guess lastly, to wrap up, John, what, you mentioned you've got an acoustic tour coming up. What else is on tap for you this year?
Well, interestingly, I was supposed to go to Europe. I was supposed to do a tour of Germany in June, but unfortunately, the promoter passed away suddenly, unexpectedly. And the whole thing kind of got put on the back burner. And just interestingly enough, when one door closes, another one opens. I just got a call from some people who are putting together a charity event in London at the London Palladium on June 4th. And it's with James Burton. I don't know if you know who James Burton is, but James Burton was Elvis's guitar player. He's a legend in the guitar community, and amazing guy. Him, Brian May from Queen, Van Morrison, Jeff Skunk Baxter, who used to be in the Doobie Brothers, and a couple of people from Chicago, the group Chicago. Anyway, they asked me if I could come over to London, and I already had a ticket because I was supposed to do this European tour. And I said, well, funny you should ask. I have a ticket and I'd love to play. So we're going to do that. So I'm going to head out to London next week, but actually the week after. And then next week I'm playing in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and then playing in Waukegan, Illinois, at a beautiful old theater called the Genesee Theater. So I'm doing 2 acoustic shows, then heading to London for that and coming back. And then I'm playing with Marty Stewart at the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville for his Midnight Jam on June 7th. And so on and so forth.
Oh, amazing. So much good stuff. Do you have any shows planned on the West Coast coming up?
Not right now. I just did a run. We played the Grammy Museum, and then we did Santa Barbara, and we went up north. But I will be coming back. I'm working on some shows in October, so I might be coming back.
Oh, great. Yes, I was so disappointed to miss the Grammy Museum. My friend Lindsay Parker interviewed you there.
Oh, is she your friend? She's great.
Yeah. Oh, I know.
She's amazing. Yeah.
She is. So,
she's a real rock and roller.
Lifer. We were at the Just Like Heaven festival together this past weekend, kind of reminiscing about the 2000 bands we covered together. So, but John, what was there anything else you wanted to add before?
Oh, we covered a lot. I didn't know it was going to be quite this comprehensive. Let's put it that way. But thank you. Tell Lindsay I said hi, and thank you for doing it. It was a great interview.
I will. Thank you, John. Such a pleasure to connect with you.
All right.
So, all right. Take care. Bye.
Later, Gator.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Stories in Harmony. If you feel more connected to the person I spoke to after the interview than you did before, then you can see the tremendous power of storytelling. If you want to share your story in a bigger way to create that sense of connection within your community and in your brand, get in touch with me via my website at lauraferrero.co or over on Instagram at Laura Ferrero Storyteller. Brand stories are one of the most effective tools for connecting authentically with your audience and growing your business and your brand. They create an emotional connection, they set you apart from others, and they're far more memorable than a bunch of facts and figures. What's more, they're very valuable for building that know, like, and trust factor that's so important for attracting loyal clients, customers, and fans. A huge thank you to producer Darren Kim, who produces Stories in Harmony, to James Breeman for creating the theme music, and to you for tuning in. I'd be so grateful if you could like, subscribe, and share this episode with somebody who might appreciate it. Thanks again for being here, and we'll see you next time.